Welcome to part 4 of the 5-part series on how to complete your novel, where I take you from the planning stages all the way to where you have a complete manuscript. Today, we're going to talk about developmental editing. Whether you're indie publishing or trad publishing, this is an editing step that you will need to do. This stage of editing is also known as content or substantive editing. I prefer developmental editing, so that's what I'm going to refer to it going forward. Now, if you followed the steps in part 1 and 2 of plotting, you'll have a lot less work to do here. But if you are a pantser or someone who writes by the seat of their pants or a very loose plotter, you're going to have more work at this stage. And that's fine. It just depends on where you thrive. Do you thrive plotting or on development editing? I personally do not enjoy doing a bunch of developmental edits for my own work, but as an editor, this is my favorite stage of editing. So, first, when you're diving into developmental edits, you are not going to send your manuscript to anybody yet. After you finish your rough draft, I always recommend that you take a break from your manuscript. This can be a week, some people do a month, whatever's going to work for you, but this break will let you kind of come back with fresh eyes. And there's a few things that you're really going to look for when you're going through this manuscript. Also, I'm going to add real quick, if you did not plot, this is a good time to make a sort of reverse outline. So as you're going through and you're reading your manuscript, create an outline based off of that so you can get an like bird's eye view of how your story is developing. But let's get into it. One of the first things you're going to look at is your story hook. Now, this is one of the first things you're going to look at, but don't get hung up here because you're probably going to write that first chapter a bazillion times. You're going to write it so much, you're going to hate it. So don't be discouraged. Most first chapters take a lot of work, but that's for a good reason. The hook of your story is what's going to grab your reader, and you need this happen really in the first sentence. And by that end of that first paragraph, your reader needs to be invested. So the opening of your story determines whether a reader or a literary agent is going to read the rest of your book. So no matter which path of publication that you want to go for, this is a necessary point of revision. Because think of it as the reader. Most readers look first at the cover, then at the blurb, and then they're going to read part of the first page. And if they aren't interested by those three things, that book is going to stay on the shelf or never make it to their digital shopping cart. So don't be impatient here. Another thing you're going to look at in developmental editing is your plot, pacing, and tension. Plot is the sequence of events that make up the story. Each event needs to logically build on the next. And while the sequence of events are building, tension should be building with it as well. The stakes should be growing, and your reader's investment in the story needs to be growing as well. And this comes from conflict, mystery, and character successes and setbacks. And regardless of the genre, the age group you're writing for, you want your story to move at a decent pace. Now, the genre and the age group will determine how fast or slow that pace is, but it still needs to be moving along. Here, you're going to look for areas that are too slow or too fast, and your aim is to fix those pacing issues. Going too fast doesn't give the reader a moment to sit in the world and with the characters, it doesn't give them a chance to breathe. But going too slow will make them lose their interest and they'll be like, okay, when is something going to happen? So, next, if you plotted, this was part of the plotting checklist, is to know your age and suitability. Now is the time to see if that's actually what came out on paper. You want to make sure that you stuck to the conventions of the genre and the age group. This isn't tropes. This is what is expected out of the genres and that age group. It's about suitability for your target audience. If you found that your rough draft did not meet the conventions that you started off on, don't worry, there's two easy solutions, one being easier than the other to this issue. One, the more lengthy option, you can go back and make corrections to make it suitable for that genre and age group. Or two, you're going to change how you're going to market this book and who it is targeted towards. This is important for marketing and actually selling your book to readers because you don't want to target to the wrong market because they're not going to like the book as much as your target audience. So if you're hitting the readers that are actually interested in your material, they're going to leave better reviews, they're going to share it, they're going to devour it. But if you send it to the wrong people, they're going to give you lower reviews. They're not going to share it. They're going to be disappointed. This happens when someone markets a book as romance and there's not a happily ever after. Part of the market suitability, it is not a romance novel. If it doesn't have a happy ending, then you just have a story with romance in it. I also don't want to sell an adult book to middle grade readers, and you don't want to sell middle grade readers to YA or adult because they're not going to be interested in it. There is just some content that is not appropriate for younger readers, so you don't want to put that in. And then adults expect to have a certain amount of teeth to their stories that middle grade might not. Although there's some middle grades that'll rip your heart out. But so along with this plot and pacing, you're going to look at the story structure. So, story structure is not looking at just the events of the story. It's going to see that all of the necessary pieces are there. For example, your exposition, there needs to be an exciting incident, rising action, an exciting climax, and a resolution. You may have scenes that flow well into one another, but if they are not coming together to that climax of the story and building tension, then your story isn't going to be engaging for very long. Readers want heightened stakes, and to read something that just stays like this the whole time is not what most people want. Even in your cozy stories, like your cozy fantasies, there needs to be little stake, but it's usually less risky. But they still want that added tension. And the same goes with a romance. Any genre that you're writing in, there needs to be all of these elements. For example, also, if exposition is missing, you're going to confuse your readers. They're not going to understand what life was like before the inciting incident, and they're not going to really be grounded in the characters, who they were, and then who they become. So you want to make sure that every element of your story structure is present. Five, you're going to look for setting slash world building. Whether you're writing an epic fantasy or a contemporary romance, having a fleshed out setting is necessary. And you're going to look through to make sure that you captured this in your rough draft. So if you did follow my plotting checklist, you would have done the world building in that checklist. And here you're making sure that it made it off the checklist and into the actual manuscript. So, for example, a fantasy story is going to need a lot more world building and a lot more time spent describing settings and even political structures than a story set in a modern day high school. But they still need to have setting and they still need to feel unique in the places that you're at. So you want to make sure that you did a good job describing things, setting the tone and the vibe of where the story's happening. Of course, one of my favorites, I think most people's favorite, is characters and characterization, their character arcs. I would argue that this is probably one of the most important things to look at when you're doing developmental edits. People come for the story, but they stay for the characters. And if your characters aren't coming across well or how you intended, this is where you need to fix them. All of your characters need to be believable. Their actions need to be consistent with who they are and the changes that they're slowly going through to become a new person by the end of the story. Also, here, this is the time to be merciless with your characters. I know as an author, we get very attached to our characters and we love all of them, but this is the time to really look to see, are all the characters you put in the story actually necessary? Now, not all characters are going to have arcs, and that's fine. That doesn't mean they need to get cut. But you do want to make sure that your most important characters and the big side characters have some sort of character arc. Some will be a little more complex than others, but that's fine. You just want to make sure there's just a little something changing. And a big one, you want to make sure that those character changes are happening alongside the events of the story and that it makes sense for their characters to change. People don't like when a character just suddenly flips and they're completely different without enough prompting. When someone finally has a enlightenment kind of moment and there was nothing that led up to it, it seems strange. And then when someone suddenly becomes a bad guy or has a crash out and there wasn't really anything prompting them to that, it leaves readers kind of scratching their head. And this happens in film and TV as well. Now, about that detaching yourself from the characters, here we go. If you have characters that are too similar and or serve the same function, it's time to figure out who's got to go. Don't fret. You can still save your beloved character from getting cut out of the novel if you find a way to differentiate them from all the other characters. So if you have two characters that are very similar in personality and or very similar in the roles that they play, you're going to have to figure out if you want to keep both of them, who is going to change things up. They're going to have to serve a different function. Their personality is going to have to change a little bit. And if you can't figure out how to make that work in a cohesive way, you can either merge them into one character or cut one of them. Now, if you delete a character that you really love, keep them around. They might get placed in a different story sometime, somewhere else. But to make sure that you're doing your story the best service, sometimes we got to say bye to the characters that we love. And the good news is that your surviving character will be more well rounded and they'll be a stronger character who serves the story. I'm going to say when you're doing developmental editing, we're not worrying about how things are worded at this point. You're really looking for pacing, any scenes that need to be rewritten, things that need to be moved around. The only exception here to that rule is dialogue. And why is it different, you might ask? Because dialogue plays a big role in how scenes play out and how characters interact and react. It's a lot different than just your prose in polishing it. So if your dialogue is stilted or unnatural, you're going to want to go back in and make it flow better because it could affect how the scene plays out as well. And especially if your characters are too agreeable or too honest, and sometimes maybe just a little too unagreeable, this could cause events to unfold too easily or not easily enough. And so going back and changing and adjusting that dialogue is going to help how those scenes play out, which will also usually mean a scene rewrite. So, because of that, this is why we're tackling it at developmental editing. And number eight, this is one that I personally do because I'm very conscientious about the messages I'm sending in my stories. So, this is kind of a theme check. So, even if you don't start off your story with a theme in mind, themes will always pop up in your story. And so, your message is what the story says about that theme and what the reader's going to take out of it. And as the author, you want to make sure that you're not sending a dangerous message to your audience. So if you did your plotting, you should have been able to see themes be created and fix it at that point. But if not, this is a good part to look what is the narrative saying about certain issues and if that's a message you agree with that you want your readers to get out of the story. And this is also a good time to look for any sort of unintended messages that are negative that may have slipped through. And you're like, ooh, I don't like how that, or ooh, I might need to change that up a bit. This is also good to address at this point because once your book is out in the world, other people will extrapolate messages and themes out of your story and they'll talk about it. And if you unintentionally put a dangerous message in there, maybe you didn't think anything of it, other people are going to tear it apart and promote it as that being your values. So this is a good time to kind of nip that in the bud. Make sure you didn't actually put anything in there you don't want people taking out of the story. Now, you're going to do developmental editing in several rounds. The first round you're going to tackle by yourself. And you might tackle more than one round on your own and get it as polished as you can without outside help. There's a few reasons for this. One, it's courteous to anyone that you're sending your manuscript to an editor, to a critique buddy, to an alpha reader. It's nice if you have done the work to polish it as much as you can without outside input. Two, it can save you money. If you're paying for a developmental editor and they catch things that you could have caught yourself if you did the edits, you're wasting your money because then you're going to have to pay again for another round and potentially again for another round because developmental editing can take several rounds. So it could just save you money in that regard. However, once you've done enough editing on your own in this stage and you don't know how you can make it any better, and maybe you don't even see any more flaws, or you do realize there is a flaw, but you can't quite pick it out or how to fix it, this is a good time to get alpha readers. Alpha readers can be critique bodies, they could be specifically alpha readers. And I have a video that talks about the difference between alpha and beta readers. There is a big difference in the mindset and the stage that they're reading in. So you want to find someone who is more editorial mindset, who is probably a fellow writer or an editor, and they're going to read it through and give you advice on developmental editing, like where you're at, what needs to be improved. There are a lot of readers and writers who don't understand the stages of editing. And you'll get a lot of people who try to line edit for you at this stage. Try to be upfront before they start editing. Be like, look, I know there's going to be line edits. That's not what I'm looking at right now. Explain that you're looking for the story beats, the character arcs, the developmental editing, because line edits at this point is going to waste your time. So hopefully you find a good alpha reader or a writing buddy. Try to keep it at this point free. Most people are happy to do manuscript squats. So yes, most people are happy to do manuscript swaps. So yes, it means you're going to have to put some work into somebody else's as well. But that's kind of part of the writing culture. And if you want to go far in the writing world, having some buddies is always a good idea. So you're going to do several rounds of more developmental edits in this way. And you may or may not need to hire a professional developmental editor. I would recommend waiting as long as you can to hire an actual editor if you decide that's what you want to do. That way, you give them the best version of the story that you could do without spending money first, and they can take it the rest of the way. If you are used to writing or you plotted really heavily, you may be able to mostly skip this step. You might just need scenes changed around or maybe some chapters rewritten. But hopefully, if you do some heavy plotting, you won't have to rearrange or write huge sections of your book. Once you are satisfied with the way that your story flows and how everything comes together, and your characters are strong, then it's going to be time to move on to the next stage of editing, which is line editing. That's my second favorite step for editing as an editor. If you're interested in learning how to do your line edits, subscribe, and I'll be covering that in the next video. If you like my content, please like this video and leave a nice comment. It helps small creators like me get more notice. Bye.